After Jing, whose Nen category has been a mystery for so long that even Togashi-sensei himself is borderline trolling us with it, let's now tackle what's arguably the second most tantalizing typological mystery and examine what Nen category is Beyond Netero most likely to be a member of. Now, while we do have very little to go on, we potentially have at least a bit more info than on Jing. So, while still being a shot in the dark, we may be shooting at a closer range at the very least. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to go through all the categories and see which ones are most compatible with Beyond's alleged feats, statements, lineage, and last and least reliably, personality. Let's get into it. First, we're of course opening things up with enhancement. How likely is it that Beyond is an enhancer? This probably won't be surprising to any of you, but it's actually one of, if not the likeliest outcome for Beyond. To support this notion, we have statements, lineage, and personality to serve as evidence. Let's tackle statements first. While having a back and forth with Kanzai, who was guarding him at the time, the Tiger Zodiac refused to get Beyond any more things with which to alleviate his boredom, stating security reasons as an excuse. In truth, he just didn't want to be bothered. Beyond points out the absurdity of that, claiming that if he wanted to, he could bash Kanzai's head in with the book he already had in his cell. Kanzai laughs it off, of course, but Beyond doesn't strike me as the sort of guy to make idle threats that he can't back up. This statement actually strikes me as having a tinge of foreshadowing to it, but we'll see. Now, we know that Kanzai was rated at an 85 by Hisoka, considering Illumi was rated at a 95 and that the 100-point benchmark is undoubtedly Hisoka himself. That alone singles Kanzai out as an incredibly capable Nen user. Apart from us knowing that the Zodiac served as Chairman Netero's sparring partners, we also know that Kanzai's occupation is that of a bodyguard and that he was assigned to the expedition's defense team. This, together with the fact that he basically admitted he isn't good for anything other than fighting, essentially confirms that his skill set is entirely fighting oriented. I go into more detail in an old video I made discussing each Zodiac's potential Nen category and ability, but all the aforementioned, along with his rather volatile personality, make me think that Kanzai is either an enhancer or, a bit more likely, emitter. This is all to say that Kanzai strikes me as an extremely competent Nen combatant with a strong affinity for enhancement. As such, if Beyond actually believes his own enhancement capabilities to be so above Kanzai's that he can overwhelm his defenses to critically injure the Zodiac with a book to the head, implies a very strong proficiency in and affinity for enhancement. The next argument for him being an enhancer is lineage. While we don't have enough family trees to really see how this holds up, the Zoldycks heavily imply that genetics plays a significant role in determining one's Nen type. For example, the three black-haired Zoldycks, namely Lumi, Miluki, and Kaluto, not counting Aluka since she's a very special case, take after their mother Kikyo and are all manipulators. Silva and Zeno are emitters, while Killua, the odd one out, is a transmuter. Killua, having a different categorical affinity from the two other silver-haired Zoldycks, makes sense thematically and narratively, considering the fact that he is, ironically, the black sheep of the family, choosing not to walk the path of the assassin. However, this only proves that genetics isn't the only factor and that one's own emergent uniqueness and environment are both key factors in determining one's Nen type. Nonetheless, the fact that all the dark-haired Zoldycks are manipulators strongly points to a correlation between genetics and Nen typology. As such, since Isaac Netero was an enhancer, and considering that Beyond is a spitting image of him when he was younger, as remarked by the Zodiacs, both softly point to Beyond as belonging to the same Nen category as his late father. The last, and to me, least compelling argument for Beyond being an enhancer is his personality. Hisoka describes enhancers as being simple and determined, which is quite the broad descriptor to say the least. Sure, the late Netero was determined to attain the pinnacle of martial arts, and Beyond Netero is determined to reach and conquer the Dark Continent. But just think how long Hisoka had been chasing Chrollo's tail, or how Moral engaged a royal guard in 1v1 while at less than half his full power. Most competent Nen users, regardless of category, can be described as determined, since Nen is to a large degree informed by one's willpower. Now, there are numerous ways to define simple, and while some like Gon and Uvogin would mostly fit this description, the late Chairman Netero, for example, was anything but simple, with even some of his closest associates, such as most of the Zodiacs, failing to grasp the depths of his true self. So, can Beyond be described as determined? Absolutely. The man's been making plans within plans and preparing for this escapade for half a damn century. He is the absolute embodiment of determination. Can he be described as simple, though? Frankly, we can't be sure since there's quite a lot we don't know about him as of yet. But to me, it seems that the answer is a definite no. While it does piggyback on the previous point, the fact that he shares as many personality traits as he does with his late father should be a greater indication of a shared category than Hisoka's largely arbitrary and overly broad aura horoscope. Next, transmutation. I'll be quick with this one. Frankly, I don't see any indication that Beyond's a transmuter. No feats, statements, or personality traits really point towards that direction. Hisoka describes transmuters as whimsical liars for whom treasure can turn into trash on a dime. And this is a man that has been laser focused on a single goal for decades. He seems to me the kind of guy who schemes and lies only to achieve a specific goal and never for its own sake. By the way, the late Chairman Netero was quite the whimsical liar, as attested by multiple people in the series, which is again why, while I do take it into account, I nonetheless view Hisoka's personality test as the weakest indication of someone's potential Nen category. All in all, transmutation goes at the very bottom as far as I'm concerned. Next, let's tackle Emission and Conjuration together. Now, you may or may not be thinking the following. Hey, Overstinker, why are you grouping these two categories together? Aren't they literally on the opposite sides of the diagram? Yes, that's precisely why I'm discussing them in tandem. See, according to Longi, one of Beyond's many bastard children, Beyond placed a curse on many of the progeny he's sired throughout the decades in Kakin, thereby forcefully opening their aura nodes since birth and turning them into cursed sacrifices. According to Longi's research and the renowned exorcist she consulted, these curses were created with the intent of targeting and killing a specific individual upon the subjects, i.e. the cursed sacrifices, death. There are a dozen powerful or appetizing, depending on the translation, cursed sacrifices, and at least as many weak or unappetizing ones. Longi believes that each cursed sacrifice is meant to target a specific prince, but that's not really important for us here. I go into this in my chapter 401 review, but Longi's assumptions and leaps in logic make me skeptical of her inferences, and relevant for us now is her premise that Beyond was personally the one who placed the curses on his children, and not an associate of his, for example. However, since we have nothing else to go on, we will accept her premise as true and this Nen feat as his for the purpose of this video. Just be aware that Beyond's status as a curse user is not definitive. So, what do we know about the curse? Well, we know that it's facilitated by what seems to be a conjured, seal, let's call it. Throughout the series, curses have almost exclusively been shown to be facilitated by either conjured entities, such as Kurapika's chain jail or Knuckles' Hakuware, or actual objects, such as a picture of the target. So, the fact that conjuration acts as the facilitator of the curse shouldn't be surprising at all. Next, we know that there are dozens of curse sacrifices, and that their curses remain primed regardless of distance. This while, for example, Knuckles' Hakuware halts gathering interest if he isn't within a 50-meter radius of his target. Apart from this, it's unknown how much, if at all, a curse sacrifice's distance from the target they're cursing affects the potency and effectiveness of the curse. But the soft implication of this setup is that it most likely has an incredibly impressive range, if range is a factor at all. Even if it is, and it probably is to be fair, even if we were talking about an effective distance of the length of the enormous black whale number 1, this would be an extremely impressive feat, considering that all curse-type abilities we've seen can only be effective at either melee or very short range. For example, Kurapika has to embed a conjured chain in his opponent's heart in order for Judgment Chain to activate. Knuckle has to initially punch someone and then remain within proximity of them in order for APR to turn into IRS. One of Genther's conditions for priming Countdown is him physically touching his target while saying the word bomber. And second Prince Camilla's have-nots must be close enough to a prince to look them in the eye when they commit, seppuku in order to ensure the curse is fatal. Since a cursed sacrifice may be on the opposite side of the black whale at the time of their death and the curse's subsequent activation, this presumed significant leeway with regards to distance implies a significant affinity for and proficiency in emission. Finally, the fact that the curse is meant to kill actually tells us almost nothing about it, since while almost exclusively conjuration facilitated, curses can be based in pretty much any category. For example, Gentru's aforementioned Countdown is a conjuration facilitated but transmutation based curse, i.e. the bomb is conjuration based while the boom is transmutation based. While the Ortho siblings' Needlefish Dead Darts is a conjuration facilitated but emission based curse, i.e. the tag marking the target is conjuration based while the dart teleportation is emission based. So, as you can see, curses can take many forms. By the way, I'm counting any ability with a detrimental effect that can be expunged by an exorcist as a curse. Beyond's curse could gradually siphon off the target's life force via emission, manipulate them into self-harm, or enhance the rate of their aging to kill them of not so natural causes. Anything's possible for the most part, meaning that it being a death curse doesn't really tell us anything concrete with regards to Beyond's category. Besides, again, emphasizing the fact that powerful emission would be required in order for such a powerful effect to remain effective at a distance. As such, we can only consider conjuration and emission as the two definitive categories that went into creating the cursed sacrifices, with, in my estimation, emission having the significantly more prominent role. As such, Beyond being a conjurer with emission as his opposite category wouldn't be ideal for an ability that leans so heavily in what would be his opposite category. Take note that since it retains its functionality regardless of range once activated, Kurapika's Judgment Chain can only be used while he is in Emperor time and receiving the boost to emission and all other categories it offers. While Beyond is definitely a much more competent Nen user than Kurapika was in the York New Arc, and could have absolutely circumvented his lack of affinity for emission via appropriate conditions and pledges, such as for example him being unable to activate the curses remotely, him being an emitter only using the conjured seal as a facilitator would make more sense and be far more optimal for the kind of arrangement he's concocted. That said though, pretty much all curse-type abilities we've seen were showcased by conjurers, and Beyond being the very opposite category does seem a bit unlikely, and as I said, it is entirely possible that the potential vast range of his curses was achieved by the conditions of him needing to consensually bed another man's wife, curse his own progeny, designate a singular target upon casting the curse, having the curse gradually grow in power over decades, all along with him being incapable of remotely triggering the curse at his leisure. But then the same logic applies if he were an emitter and needed all these conditions in order to conjure a proper long-term catalyst for his curse. It honestly works both ways. Finally, it should be noted that he matches neither stereotypical emitters, who are described as impatient and not detail-oriented, nor conjurers, who, according to Hisoka, tend to be high-strung. Thank you, Hisoka. Very insightful. But, as I said, I always consider this as the weakest argument for determining someone's Nen type. This was all to say that I'd put the chances of him being either a conjurer or emitter as more or less equal, and I'd put both just slightly above his chances of being an enhancer, since Hatsu feats should absolutely be considered the strongest indicator of category, rather than statements, half a lineage, or a horoscope equivalent. Now, as far as him being a manipulator goes, in the same vein as with him being a transmuter, there's currently nothing pointing to that. As it stands, while unlikely, the chances of it are, I'd say, at least reasonably higher than with him being a transmuter, just based on the fact that A, him being a manipulator with one or more manipulation-based abilities simply makes far more sense considering his long-term planning. Having abilities capable of nudging things in the right direction would work greatly in his favor. B, manipulation is adjacent to emission, which would account for the high affinity for and proficiency in it Beyond's curses may potentially require. Manipulators also often utilize conjuration to facilitate their abilities, so there's that as well. And C, Hisoka describes manipulators as logical people that do things at their own pace. And that, to me at least, describes Beyond's personality much better than transmutation and even emission or conjuration do. Last, and definitely not least, could Beyond be a specialist? Absolutely. Hisoka describes specialists as being independent and charismatic, which is the best generalization of Beyond's character. While he does rely on a bunch of people to get things done, at the end of the day he takes the reins to make sure things go his way. And even the hunters who follow him, such as Bill, have absolutely no insight into his plans. As far as charisma is concerned, the man essentially single-handedly changed the course of human history by organizing the DC voyage. If that's not enough of a charisma feat, he's also 1. In bed with the Emperor of Kakin, the leader of a global superpower, 2. Has literally been in bed with the wives of dozens of high-ranking Kakin officials, slip of the tongue, 3. Has Pariston working for him, 4. Has a spy among the Zodiacs, and 5. Believes his influence pervasive enough for things to go his way without him keeping a direct pulse on any of it, trusting that the few people who are in the know what they're doing. If all that doesn't speak to a specialist's bonus to charisma, I don't know what does. Apart from that, we've yet to witness or hear of anyone who's undergone a natural Nen type shift to become a specialist. And if anyone would know how, supposing there is a method to it, it would be Beyond. If Morena is to be believed, being a specialist is an objective boost, and Beyond would seek to attain every edge he could in order to realize his plan and eventually not only arrive at, but in time conquer the Dark Continent. Being a specialist would have easily allowed a Nen user of Beyond's caliber to create the perfect ability for his needs, while sacrificing the least in terms of conditions and pledges. If there were sacred scriptures, be it in the known world or beyond, pun very much intended, outlining the method for achieving the shift, or if there was an artifact which somehow facilitated it, I'm sure they would have found their way to him. It's also possible that Beyond had simply spontaneously undergone the natural Nen type shift, or that he was just born a specialist. Unlikely considering how rare they are, hence why I consider the shift as being the likelier option. Therefore, this is how I'd arrange the categories from the most to the least likely. Specialization would go at the top, surprise surprise, followed very closely by Emission and Conjuration. Slightly below those two would be Enhancement, then there'd be a bit of a gap with Manipulation coming in next, and dead last would be Transmutation. While Specialization would be the most optimal category for Beyond, I'm personally hoping that he is an emitter simply because it's my favorite category. Though him being an enhancer would A. put him in the best spot to benefit from the 5 regular categories, not counting Specialization, and B. would serve as a great parallel to his late father, who as an enhancer relied on manipulation, conjuration, and/or emission to manifest his nigh transcendent Hatsu. Speaking of parallels, while a bit on the nose, it'd be cool if Beyond, inspired by his late father, whom he respected enough to postpone his ultimate dream for, had multiple abilities, which, for example, had the condition of Beyond needing to weave elaborate hand signs, which would have normally taken a dozen or more minutes, but which he can do in mere seconds in order to activate each of his abilities. But I'm just writing fanfics at this point. And that's that. What do you guys think Beyond's category is, or what would you like it to be? Feel more than free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Before signing off, I'd very much like to thank the thinkers and overthinkers for going the extra mile in supporting the channel. As always, thank you very much for watching, your feedback is always appreciated, subscribe if you'd like more content like this, and I'll see you in the next one.